everybody, this is Tony Velez, CEO at VerSprite, joined by Greg Mosher and April Brown from VerSprite as well. We're doing a cloud security beachside chat, apparently, and we wanted to pick Greg Mosher's brain. Greg is VP of Product and Security Ops at VerSprite, and April Brown is in our marketing group. So welcome to you both. Hope you both are well.
Well,
Tony?
I wanted to start, Greg, right off the gate. A lot of people may not know a little bit about you, your background. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, who you are, what you do in terms of VerSprite, and also kind of your background on cloud security and engineering in general.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Tony. So at VerSprite itself, as you mentioned, I am VP of Product. So we look at lots of product initiatives to support our services at VerSprite. And with SecOps, we focus a lot on security automation for our customers. And more of that, a lot of that has really gotten much heavier into public cloud. The common clouds service providers, Amazon, Microsoft with Azure, and Google Cloud platform. Sorry, stumbled over that. Anyways, and for the most part, we're really finding, obviously, the adoption is now in full swing. There's a lot of need and a lot of, benefits to it out there for our customers. And so we really just try to help them through it and really focusing on the security side.
No, that sounds good. Speaking of adoption, I know that over the past 10 years, there's obviously been a big shift from on-prem infrastructure to cloud. And of course, cloud meaning infrastructure, platform, applications, containers, et cetera. So what have you seen in your experience, obviously even before VerSprite, in terms of cloud adoption challenges for many organizations?
Right. So I lived this. I lived this in a previous life, probably starting a good 8 years ago. And, one of the big challenges we had initially was knowledge. It was getting skill sets. It was getting the right people. Certainly, even though I was actually in a fairly large engineering organization, we just didn't have the staffing that really understood cloud. There wasn't really a lot of external resources out there for us. So it was a lot of kind of just learn as you go. That has changed drastically. I think there's people are much more cloud knowledgeable now. There's a lot more training available. I think the CSPs have done a good job of really kind of bringing people up to speed. And there's certainly a lot of vendors out there. I mean, security vendors like ourselves, or just, kind of architecture and infrastructure vendors out there that help people through it. And it's important because I think a lot of what people, whenever they first go in from their legacy applications, is really trying to understand, what does this look like? What does my roadmap look like? What's my cost going to be of this? What additional security risk am I introducing to myself? So I've been through that. I've been, really quite frankly, where we've had applications that have gone up over $100,000 a month on AWS, which really is quite eye-opening to CFOs. And we had to go through that pain of actually trying to really get our stuff more cloud native and actually control those costs. And, honestly, it was really vigilance. It was really just managing. It was actually, monitoring. It was, and trying to improve really every single application release, not only the application itself, but the actual infrastructure that you were running on. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with everything you're saying there. And, I think that for CFOs and IT, traditional IT leaders that have come from on-prem, moving to the cloud can be, excuse the pun, a little bit nebulous for them as they try to navigate, just simply the management of it. Speaking of management, so once you've gone through a strategy of cloud adoption, whether it be partnering with SaaS providers or moving to a cloud service provider for infrastructure as a service, management challenges, again, going back to your experience, what are some war stories that you have seen in terms of managing infrastructure in the cloud? And what are some good go-to strategies for once you're in the cloud and once you have your various respective virtual environments and enclaves about actually managing that infrastructure?
Well, I think one of the issues is managing actually asset management and infrastructure management, where you really understand what you have. With the cloud environments, it's very easy to spin up new infrastructure. It's very easy to virtually wire resources together. And quite frankly, you can lose it. You can really end up with, resources, basically burning money every month and actually exposing yourself to possible security risk. So really getting a program in place that actually can monitor those assets was a strategy that we used. And I think that takes even a step further in getting into actual infrastructure automation, actually really rolling your infrastructure out through scripting, either, various things like Ansible. We were now see Terraform being quite popular, that you actually have a source of truth that really is in code. And you actually are really using infrastructure as code. It's a bit of an old moniker, but quite frankly, that's what we did. And it really got, basically gave us a good handle on what we actually had in the cloud. We knew what our costs were going to be. We knew what our basically our attack surface was, and we could manage it much better. The other thing that I think is maybe a little bit of a struggle for people coming in is that now, particularly when you look at tooling, and I would say, typically from our industry, security tooling, there's now so many options out there, and it's really understanding what is it that I need, type of cloud that I have. Maybe it's got some legacy applications. I'm not really cloud native. I'm not containerized. Do I need, an actual workload management product, an actual workload protection program is their term. Or do I need vulnerability management? What do I need? There's so many options. And I think that's very confusing. I think we understood the on-prem needs very well, but I think now that we moved to cloud, a lot of those same tools are there, but there's a lot of questions on, do I really need this? How do I deploy it? So I think that's the other thing that I think is a big challenge when it comes to cloud management today.
No, all great points and very true. One of the things that we've seen over the past couple of years is a lot of tenants within cloud environments and even CSPs themselves, like, Microsoft Azure and AWS, they've had some security issues in terms of misconfigurations. Can you speak on, some of the impacts of misconfigurations and most importantly, how to best address that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, whenever we look at misconfigurations, they're really across the board, but there's some highlight areas. And, one of the biggest areas that we see is really in identity and access management, because you now have infrastructure that is, quite frankly, available to everybody that's out there on the internet. And your main kind of front gate is how strong your identity access management is. And for the first time ever, we are now in a case now where if the wrong person, an admin or whoever, actually has their credentials compromised, you can actually lose your entire infrastructure, at least for a period of time, to an attacker. They can shut everything down. They can lock you out. We've seen cases of that, right? So, so number one is really starting with that, making sure that as solid as possible. The other is then more kind of the traditional, what we see attacks through the network. And I think a lot of people in a data center situation, you kind of have this one little hole that comes through that's protected by a firewall. Everything is in that. You understand that. And there's some aspects of the cloud that are like that, particularly when it comes to your compute resources. You can firewall them off and, protect them, network-wise. But there's a lot of other resources that you use, particularly such as database and storage and different sorts of, kind of higher end services, for, data warehousing, map reduce, obviously container management that really kind of sit off to the side. There's services that you're actually using. I mean, you're really using these more as paths. And the configuration for those it's different than what you have, say, for your main compute. And so you've got multiple things that you have to worry about. You have to understand the interaction between them. And I think a lot of people will lose that. And it exposes those things. I mean, just simple example, S3, storage for Amazon. That's really outside of your main kind of protection realm that you set up for your compute. And if you don't get that set up right, people can get access to your S3 buckets. They can store stuff out there and, quite frankly, run up the bill on you. They can, use it as a malware distribution point, or, really worst case, they can potentially get to some very sensitive data. So I think it's understanding all these different exposed aspects and how do you actually secure them.
Absolutely. Now, in looking at the CSP players, over the years, really, Amazon was, really took the market in terms of being largely first to market in the cloud infrastructure as a service space. So they've had a chance to work out their kinks as part of a cloud service provider. So let's begin by looking at Amazon for a second and AWS. in terms of configurations, hardening, that fulfills compliance objectives, that fulfills, cost management, that fulfills asset management goals, and obviously security. What are some specific recommendations in AWS that you would have that everyone can take to the bank?
Okay. So I think one of the things that you need visibility. You need monitoring, right? There's so many different aspects, so many different resources that are out there. And one of the kind of the core services that AWS has is called CloudWatch and CloudTrail. You can log everything. You can log everything that's going on. Now, this can be basically quite overwhelming. There can be a lot of information, but by a combination of using CloudWatch with alerts and monitors, and also using what is called AWS config to basically also alert to config changes and maybe even deny some config changes. That gives you at least a bit of an alarm wrapper that if something gets misconfigured, which does happen as the environments change, I guess environments are going to change a lot more rapidly than what an actual, say, hard on-prem environment is going to change, just simply because of the ease. These are going to alert you, right? Now, I would say that whenever you set all this stuff up, it's kind of you're monitoring for things that could go bad. It's also a good idea to run some sort of tool that actually scans your configuration, because it can be run, quite often. Really we recommend weekly or even monthly. It's typically, for most companies, is about all they need to do. But that, like any other piece of software, gets updated. It basically keeps up with changes that are occurring, say, within Amazon and their offerings. It's keeping up with basically new sort of rule sets, new potential security holes that weren't thought of before. And so it's a good backup to CloudWatch and AWS config. So I would also say that, if you're somebody kind of jumping in and not really, back to the tooling thing, what tools do I want to run? I would almost right out of the gate enable AWS Security Hub and an AWS Guard Duty. Not necessarily the easiest tools in the world to use, but they give you a layer of protection, and it's actually very cost effective. It's a good first step. Just turn that stuff on and you've actually improved your overall security. And then finally, going back to identity and access management, if you're going to use users in AWS, you really need to control the permissions. We actually recommend using the various AWS job roles that are out there for assigning, figure out whatever somebody's role is and really assign them the appropriate permissions based on that, and make sure that everybody has multi-factor turned on. If you're a bigger company that, say, has your own Active Directory, or you're using potentially Office 365, Okta, or something else, keep that as your identity management and just simply do what we call federate in to AWS, so it's using those same permissions, so that you really have one place to control your users, and you're just simply mapping those users to different roles in AWS.
That's great. Very actionable tips. I appreciate that. Now, speaking of tools, I understand that you're working on something yourself, and I can definitely vouch for the confusion that, although AWS does provide, a good list of tools, like you said, it can be very confusing. And in many instances, the experience of using those tools, interfacing with those tools, can be confusing as well. What's been different with what you've been working on with you and your team, and what sort of extra add-on does that provide in terms of tooling, monitoring, or vigilance?
Right. So what you're speaking of is what we internally term our cloud security assessment platform, or CSAP is our internal abbreviation for it. And what that is something that on a very regular basis does check your entire security posture that you have in AWS, and we've actually just recently expanded it. We're now looking at Azure, and in the future we will also look at even a Google Cloud Platform. So what it does is it really is looking at all that. It is looking at your configuration, and it's looking at it on a regular basis to determine when there are deltas, when you are simply going out of, essentially as a term, we don't like but called best practice, right? Saying this no longer, this current setting no longer really conforms to whatever best practices are. Maybe it's an open security group. It's something that's allowing, too much access to, say, a compute instance. And that itself, we've really combined that. There's a number of other tools out there that do that, but we've also really worked with a lot of our customers to try to give them some additional functionality on there to help them really manage. And one of the things that we found, as mentioned, talking about, say, Security Hub and Guard Duty, those are very region-based for AWS. AWS is in a number of regions across the world. It allows you to get your resources closer to your customers, obviously. If you want to switch between those regions, it's a very kind of manual process when you're in the AWS interface. And it's really not something that can kind of show you simply a one-stop shop. And that's something that we focused on. So we will even pull in Security Hub findings. We'll pull in, even guard duty findings. We'll actually show them kind of across multiple different accounts. Number of customers that we have actually run multiple accounts just simply for billing purposes, right? Multiple accounts, multiple regions. We kind of give them that top level view of all their resources and essentially all of the findings that we see as far as security misconfigurations. So we really kind of taken it more from an ease of use. Making it a little bit less of a kind of a techie tool where you're having to go through, the AWS console, and actually giving you a bit of a broader kind of higher level view where now you can drill down.
Well, that's great. No, that's amazing, and definitely looking forward to having more interaction with you, in similar webcasts like this. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and run to that virtual beach behind me and dip in and play with the sharks. But it was great catching up with you, Greg. Great seeing you, April. You guys stay safe during this pandemic lockdown, and we'll be in touch.